Regular meeting of the Transgender Equity Council will now begin. Good evening, my name is Track, and I'm the staffer of the Transgender Equity Council. Before we begin, I'd like to note that this meeting includes the remote participation of members as authorized under Minnesota statutes, section 13D.021, due to the declared local health pandemic. The city will be recording and posting this meeting to the city's website and YouTube channel as a means of increasing public access and transparency. Board meetings are public and subject to the Minnesota open meeting law. I will now call this meeting to order and call the roll so that we may verify the presence of a quorum. And so for new folks, just if you can unmute and say that you're here when I call your name. Kenzie Weller.
Here.
Hunter Williams.
Here.
Diana Anderson.
Here.
Melissa Berner.
Here.
Mira Khan.
Present.
Billy Kurek.
Here.
Galen Mitchell.
Here.
Olivia St. John.
Here.
Karen Wood.
Here.
Yeah, Jean. Destiny, are you unmuted?
Here. Sorry.
No worries. Wonderful. So we have a quorum, and with that, we will proceed to our agenda, a copy of which was posted for public access to the city's legislative information management system, which is available at lims.minneapolismn.gov. I'm going to stop the screen share now so that we can see each other. And Hunter, I will pass it back to you to take us through adopting the agenda and minutes.
And this is Melissa, the interpreter. It looks like Hunter is actually frozen at the moment. So hopefully will not be frozen soon.
Oh, he just left. Okay. Maybe that's Hunter coming back?
There we go.
One moment, tech issues. Hunter and interpreters, let us know when you're good again, and then we'll adopt the agenda and minutes.
Okay, we are ready. We're ready to go. All right, so would anyone, sorry about getting disconnected like that, everyone, appreciate your patience. So would anyone like to motion to accept the agenda?
So moved. This is Destiny. I motion.
Great, this is Track. I'm going to take that as a motion in a second. And do we want, actually, we don't have last month's meeting, minute meetings to adopt because we didn't have quorum and didn't meet last month, so that's perfect. And I'm going to roll one more time just to vote on the adoption of the agenda. So Kenzie?
Yes.
Hunter?
Yes.
Diana?
Yep.
Melissa?
Yes.
Amira?
Yes.
Billy?
Yes.
Galen?
Yep.
Olivia?
Yes.
Taryn?
Yes.
And Destiny?
Yes.
Wonderful. There are 10 in favor, 3 absent, and none opposed. The motion passes. And I believe the next thing was Kenzie and I were going to give some updates on how recommendations had panned out, and we had not fully divided who was going to lead what. So Kenzie, if there's things you want to lead, go for it, or just pass it to me and I can take whatever, since we did not prep this combination in advance.
Okay, well, budget. I will pass to you, Track.
Great. So I am going to try to summarize for folks. The city's 2022 budget was finalized and adopted last night. I'm going to summarize the pieces that you all had actively been advocating around or following, and I'm going to invite Councilmember Cunningham to please add to or correct any of this, since you were obviously far more deeply involved in this process than I was. But a very quick kind of context for new TEC members. So every year the mayor proposes a budget, and then the council has essentially the like fall into about now in order to make their amendments and then vote on the finalized budget. And so of the things that the TEC was advocating for as amendments to the budget, the first one was $7,500 for Minneapolis Employment and Training to do LGBTQ competency training for all of the providers they fund. So organizations like Step Up, anything that does adult or youth employment programming. And Councilmember Fletcher was actually able to work with the director of Community Planning and Economic Development, the department they're in, to find that money in their pre-existing budget. They didn't even need a budget amendment. So they have moved around some money in their budget so that that training can happen. I'm going to be following up with them in the next few days to start figuring out logistics on any support they need on that for next year. If they want support identifying trainers or something like that, I'll reach out to you all. But that happened. So that's great news, and happened in like the simplest way possible. The second one that you all were like actively advocating around. Are we switching interpreters? Do you need me to pause?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Great.
Yep,
And
we're set.
if you want me to not pause until you actually tell me you're switching, I can also do that. I just saw Coco come on and was like, this is probably my cue. But so the second one was $25,000 of overtime pay for housing inspectors so they can lead anti-discrimination trainings with property owners. You all helped consult on a training that we developed for them to lead last year. And so Councilmember Ellison was excited about proposing this amendment and was planning to bring it forward. And what he let me know yesterday is when he talked with leadership and regulatory services, the department they're in, leadership didn't actually feel like they were prepared enough that it made sense to fund it right now, and thought it made more sense to wait until the middle of next year when we do the American Rescue Plan Act Phase 2 funds, and to fund it with that instead. So Councilmember Ellison has committed to me that he wants to help make sure that gets funded with those funds since it didn't happen in the 22 budget. And I'm going to take responsibility for following up with regulatory staff, services staff, and figuring out what they need to feel prepared enough that there's not any concern of like, oh, we'll be allocating money, but we won't actually be ready to do the trainings like came up this time. I take some responsibility for kind of like thinking things were good and not confirming, and therefore was caught by surprise when Councilmember Ellison found out that they didn't feel ready to roll it out yet. So that's a learning on my part as well. But the goal is for that to get funded in mid-2022, and we can kind of do everything we need to get that ready to hit the ground rolling as soon as it's funding. So that's a middle ground situation. And then the other thing, and this is where I'm going to try to summarize this accurately, and Councilmember Cunningham, I really invite you to jump in. But the other thing I know you all were advocating around was specifically taking funding for these things out of MPD's budget. That didn't happen in part because one got found in its pre-existing budget and the other didn't get funded. The other thing, as it's been explained to me, is that there is a court order right now requiring the city to get our MPD staffing up to the like minimum required amount. And as a result, there's been attorney's guidance that the council members couldn't cut MPD's proposed budget because that would be seen as out of compliance with the court order. Council members did lead, and shout out to Councilmember Cunningham on this, on finding money still for alternatives to policing work, both the Office of Performance and Innovation, which has done that like mental health crisis response team work, and also the Office of Violence Prevention, out of American Rescue Plan Act funds, since they couldn't pull it from another source. And so a bunch of money did get allocated to that, but not quite in the way that you all initially advocated for, or it has looked like in other years. Obviously, a lot more things happened in the budget, but I tried to keep this summary to just the very specific things you all had been advocating around. I'm going to pause here both for people to like add or correct what I've missed and to answer any questions anyone has. That was accurate. Amazing. In that case, I will move on to tenant opportunity to purchase, which, Kenzie, I literally just sat in on a meeting on that right before this, so I can take that because I've not had time to get any of that info to you.
Take it away. I know things are looking good.
Yes. Accurate summary. So tenant opportunity to purchase will ideally be an ordinance. Some of you all who were on the TEC in like the beginning of 2021 heard a presentation on it much earlier on, but an ordinance that would allow tenants, when their landlord is selling their property, to have the first chance to purchase the property before anyone else, including what's called right of first refusal. I am not going to try to explain all the technicalities. I am not the person for that. We can bring in a presentation on it if you all want to hear it in a lot more detail that I can offer. I know you all were advocating for it to get like finalized and approved before essentially now, when we get a new city council in January. That did not happen. However, the draft ordinance that's out there, from what I've heard, is a lot better than anybody expected, than many people expected. That was maybe a strong statement. A lot more supportive of tenants, does include right of first refusal, and it does seem like there could be enough support on council to pass it next year with the incoming council. So it is not necessarily going to disappear just because we have a changeover in council members. I think the things that have been flagged for me as things to pay attention to, and that I will keep you updated on where these are moving and are things you all may want to advocate around as it gets further. One is that it only works if the city funds it well and staffs it well. Otherwise, it does not actually benefit the tenants it is theoretically designed to. So this is definitely going to be a budget conversation next year in a really big way. It is the way the ordinance is drafted right now, it would be slowly phased in as funding and staffing is available, but requires significant financial support. There are a couple different exemptions to which buildings are not included. One that I've heard the most concerns raised around is an exemption, and that I want to bring to you all, I've been asked to bring to you all, is an exemption where if a property owner has 5 or fewer properties, like 5 or fewer individual units, and they're all in 1 to 4 unit buildings, they're exempt, which exempts particularly a ton of North Side properties, because that is generally what renting looks like in large areas of the North Side. And so I think there will be a conversation next year about, can we bring that number down to 3 or fewer or 2 or fewer? And I will keep you updated on opportunities for public comment and on just getting you more information about that. And again, if anyone wants us to bring in housing staff to give you a more detailed presentation, I'm happy to coordinate that. And then just the like, okay, where does like financial education and all of the other things that need to come with the funding and staffing come in to make sure that it is supporting the tenants it needs to. So all of that to say, it's moving. I'll keep you posted. Let me know if you want to hear about it from someone other than me. And these are some of the things that I'm gonna like keep flagging on your radar as it moves forward. Does anyone have any questions on that? And then safe use sites. Kenzie, do you want to go? Do you want me to go?
So, wow, where to begin? Track and I just recently met with Councilmember Ellison, who is interested in looking at safe use sites and what that could look like. I forget if we had a TEC meeting after we met with Councilmember Fletcher. But anyway, to summarize that meeting is basically safe use sites are tricky because it's technically kind of not legal, but New York just did it. And so that's something that we're looking at to try to like model after. But so Councilmember Fletcher was telling us about safe use sites in like a low key way, where he describes them as like pop-up kind of like bathrooms who just happen to have a staff person, and the bathrooms have a button you have to press every 5 minutes, and if you don't press that button, like somebody will come in and check on you. So I think what we're trying to do, and I think what our next step is to engage with the attorney's office to creatively figure out how we can make this happen. I think what has stopped us in the past, or what has been a response in the past, is like, oh, that's illegal. But since New York is doing it, I think we could probably get creative with that. And I think we also piqued some interest with like some incoming council members that could potentially work on this with Councilmember Ellison. And then I think the only other thing to note is that a while back we voted on a letter to City Council, and I basically typed up the TEC really wants this, but Councilmember Ellison brought up maybe like a strategic move for us to make is to maybe not send that letter quite yet, because it is possible by doing so we can like pique the interest of people who oppose safe use sites and therefore like cut off the conversation before it even begins. So I think we wanted to maybe open that up for discussion to see how people feel about it. But yeah, that's all I have for safe use sites. Basically, we have our letter and we need to figure out if we're going to hang on to it or send it anyway. And I don't actually know if we need to do anything about the attorney's office or if we already asked Councilmember Ellison to do that.
Yeah, this is Track. Councilmember Ellison is good to talk to the attorney's office. I think the other next steps include just like more relationship building with the organizations on the ground who should be involved and legal experts out in the community who are legal experts on this particular type of topic. So I think that's just like, if folks have connections in any of those areas that we should know about, please say so now, send me a text, drop that in the chat, whatever. But other than that, it is a question about like, do you want to nudge council with the letter, or do you want to hold off on the letter in case that creates energy from oppositional members?
This is Billy. Kenzie, Track, everybody, I guess. Would it be helpful if we, I forget what we use, I'm sorry, is it the OneDrive or a Google Share we have?
SharePoint, but...
SharePoint, okay, there's just so many with work and this that I forget. If maybe, like New York, if we can get documents of other cities who have used safe use sites and maybe the legal definition or like a legal way, and just have that on the back burner before we send that letter, I think maybe we should wait to send it if you're thinking that people having eyes on it will give them time to like kind of get their arsenal ready to like shoot this down. Maybe we can also just have time to build up, hey, this worked in these cities, ABC, and then we're a little bit more, I don't know, especially with the new folks coming in to the TEC. And then also January, the new city council turns over. So like maybe we could just give this a little bit more time before we present it, and then also just have more data of where it's worked before. If we could all just, I don't know, if that's like a homework assignment, we all just like put something in to the SharePoint.
All right, and this is Hunter. I could sort of agree with most of the points made. The timing, though, you know, in New York, they've already begun, and I think it can go pretty quickly. So if we can copy some of what they've done and then adapt it for where we are, you know, that would be gathering the data to justify. Then I think that then we could talk with the council, you know, we know that there's going to be new council members. And so wait until after that. And then it should be in process, but I don't think we want to wait too long, though. I think we should keep it moving as much as we can in process. You know, we do have data from New York City, so that's some justification. That's just my 2 cents.
This is Kenzie. Yes, I hear you, Billy and Hunter. I think so, like, it's definitely legal in New York, that we know. And I think we can easily, if council members were to come back to say, we can't do this, it's illegal, we can easily say, well, yeah, it is. Look at, you know, these other cities that have done so. I think what I heard in the meeting with Councilmember Ellison, and also just my own experience as like a Minneapolis resident, I think it's less about legality and more about like less progressive council members being concerned about safe use sites inviting more crime and inviting more, I don't know, general like bad things into the city. I feel like Minneapolis has a reputation now of being like more dangerous after the uprisings, and, you know, I hear about like carjackings all the time, whatever. And they say we have like a crime problem in Minneapolis, right? So like I think that the conversation is less about the legality and more about how are we going to get people on board to like this kind of like controversial newer idea that I think can scare some like less progressives away from that. Sorry if that wasn't worded beautifully. Happy to clarify if need be.
This is Billy. Kenzie, I'm wondering then if I have not read the letter yet in SharePoint, but are we taking the approach of this is kind of a solutions-based approach to mental health, homelessness? If we push it that way instead of like a crime prevention, maybe that is like a softer approach is what I'm thinking. Okay.
It's been a while since I read my own letter, but I basically just said this is what a safe use site is. There is kind of data on the fact that this works, and it's only like we only have a little bit of data because I think places are kind of scared to implement this. So we have a little bit of data that shows that it does reduce deaths by overdose. And now that you're saying that, I'm wondering if, because I'm not not super sure on Mayor Fry, and the opioid hub is something that I've heard used. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but I feel like we could add in our letter that this could be a part of, addressing the opioid crisis in Minneapolis. Yes.
This is Track. I can just add. So yes, I think the letter takes that approach, and the opioid hub is a thing the mayor proposed in the budget to essentially give like a space for a lot of the orgs doing harm reduction work around drug use to operate out of, which it was suggested to us that we point out, that you all point out in the letter that that space would be even more effective if it could also be a safe use site. I think it's important to take a solutions-based approach in the letter, and I think Kenzie, you're right that all of the stigma around drugs and homelessness, the ways racism and everything play into here, mean that the people who are going to be opposed will be opposed whether or not you take a solutions-based approach. And the thing about New York, it is not necessarily that it is 100% legal in New York. It is illegal on a federal level, depending on how you interpret the federal law. It is that New York is choosing to find a way to take the risk and thinks they can win in court or take the risk of losing if necessary. I have gathered what of New York's legal research I've found so far. I think continuing to gather things in SharePoint is great. The New York legal research I found so far, I sent over to Councilmember Ellison to send to the attorney, but New York is just implementing them now, and we'll see. That will probably be a multi-year court battle, even if they're able to stay open the entire time they're in court. So I want to give you all that sense of timeline in terms of it is great to have an example of a city that is doing this quote unquote above ground. And I think great to point to for the attorney's office. And we can't actually say it's legal in New York because
I was just going to add to that. This is Galen. That I believe in the past, this was attempted in Philadelphia, and the nonprofit that was attempting it got, tackled by the Justice Department. They were the ones who were like, no, you can't do this. And Biden has said that he's not supportive of this, even though he was, I believe, one of the authors of the bill that makes it illegal to provide someone a location to use drugs, but that he regrets the legislation. So there's a chance that the Justice Department may not go after this, but other people will say, well, this is against the law. Someone needs to do something about it. So it's not legal, but they're doing it anyway. Similar to like Colorado and other states legalizing marijuana. They're like, oh, it's not legal at the federal level. Oh, well, we're doing it anyway. And crossing fingers that just like makes more progress than avoiding it.
And this is Melissa, the interpreter. If you don't mind just holding for one moment so the interpreters can switch. Okay, we're set. Thank you. We can go ahead in case there was a misunderstanding. We're ready to go. I'm just saying.
This is Track. I feel like what I'm hearing from you all for the moment is a hold off on the letter. If folks are able to find more research, please throw it in SharePoint or let me know and I can organize things. And I will keep you updated on where this is going internally. Does that feel like an accurate summary? And in that case, considering you all voted to send the letter, I think you probably need to vote to undo that. But Diana, I saw your hand.
Yes, this is Diana. Sorry, I had a question on research. Do you want us to research more on how it's working in the United States or find general support for how it functions as harm reduction? Because there are several studies on how it has worked in Canada that might be useful as far as making an argument just for simply having them. and research is my strong suit, so I can find those.
This is track. That's Galen, go.
I was going to say, this is Galen. I think this was already kind of identified by other folks. The issue is not so much, is this effective in this situation? It seems mostly like, is it legal and how can it be packaged such that the city is willing to take on the risk? And so I don't know if we need information on its efficacy per se, but rather on the, if you do this, you won't get sued by the Justice Department and end up spending hundreds of thousands of dollars defending your decision.
This is track. I would agree with that and add, yeah, legal routes and or like figuring out who the legal experts are who either were useful for advising in other cities or are based locally here, I think is one of the key research questions actually right now.
This is Diana. Thank you for that. That gives me a direction to go. Thank you.
This is track. In that case, we need a motion to take back the letter, if that seems to be the consensus.
This is Hunta. I motion to not send the letter, to take back the letter. Who seconds me?
This is
I'll
Billy. I
second.
second.
Great, and I'm gonna call names quickly. Kenzie.
Yes.
Hunta.
Yes.
Diana.
Yes.
Melissa.
Yes.
Amira.
Yes.
Billy.
Yes.
Galen.
Yep.
Olivia.
Yes.
Taryn.
Yes.
And Destiny.
Yes.
Wonderful. There are 10 in favor, 3 absent, none opposed. The motion passes. That letter is on hold. I'm going to give a quick update about other, just like, I think what we tried to get in the practice of doing last year. Oh, and I see Sunu's question, is it possible to convene a group of lawyers from communities and not Minneapolis attorneys? City council members can only go to the city attorney's office for their legal perspective, is what I've been told. However, other staff on this project, were this to become a project, could also talk to other legal experts and would still, it is still useful to know of multiple legal experts. However, the council members themselves have to go to the attorney's office. Again, anyone correct me if I'm wrong on that. But to what I was going to say on recommendations, you all asked for a practice last year of just kind of like running through your recommendations to council for updates on which ones had anything moving on them. I didn't manage to compile that until after I originally sent you all the Word doc agenda, but in the agenda that's on LIMS and in the minutes is linked a version of your recommendations where under each bullet point, I note where it's at. And I can also screen share that right now. I'm not going to go through every line in this document because it is long, but I'm going to kind of summarize the things that are in motion. So I'll screen share it and then I'll give a minute for the interpreters to get repinned before I start talking through it. Alrighty. And if you can let me know when you're good.
And we're set. Thank you.
Sweet. Okay. So tenant opportunity to purchase, we just talked about, but that's the first thing in here. So I still put it on here. And then the other housing piece that is the staffing support for regulatory services that we also just talked about. So nothing new in housing beyond what I already said.
This is Amira. I can't see any of the screen.
Oh, that's really weird. Is it screen sharing for other people?
Yes.
Yes, it might be your Wi-Fi connection.
Connection good for me, but it's just
Okay.
a black screen for me.
That's so strange. I'm going to exit the screen share and restart it in case that helps. And if it doesn't, I am also talking through it and it's just an extra visual example. So let me know if my summaries don't make sense. But hopefully my summaries will work if we can't get it to work in this format.
Okay.
Are you seeing it now by any chance?
Still no.
Okay. I'm going to summarize well.
All right.
Sorry about that.
Sorry to make you do more work, but
No, you're good. So in terms of community safety, I'm scrolling past the budget things I talked about. In your category of community safety and healing, you talked about turning the Division of Race and Equity into a department and getting additional trans equity funding. The conversation on turning the division into a department has been postponed until a director is hired, which will hopefully be in the next few weeks. I will keep you all posted on that, but the trans equity funding did not increase. Safe use sites, we just talked about. So here's one I have movement on. The Trans Issues Work Group has been working on getting what we're calling gender equity guidelines attached to our contracts with shelters and other social service providers, essentially requiring that contracts above a certain minimum dollar amount implement new policies and trainings around trans equity in their organizations. We are hoping to bring this through City Council and finalize it as a resolution in January or February of 2022. I've met with all of the city contract managers who manage the relevant contracts. They're on board. We're getting them a Gender Inclusivity 101 training, so they also feel more familiar with this as they're discussing it with the organizations. But that is moving forward and will hopefully be finalized and in implementation process before the end of the winter, which is excellent news. In terms of expanding the city's definition of supplier diversity, which currently the technical definition that's used based on like what these certifications are called is women-owned and minority-owned business enterprises is the language the city uses. And in terms of expanding that to also include LGBTQ-owned, disabled-owned, and veteran-owned, we are in meetings, we are in progress, still figuring out what the next steps are. Thank you, Billy, for jumping into a bunch of those meetings, but that is moving forward. I will give you clearer updates when I have them. In terms of the city's lobbyists advocating at the state level for a panic defense ban, that is now on their legislative agenda, so they will be lobbying on that front. That is accomplished. I do not explicitly have updates on the next few, other than that the Guaranteed Basic Income pilot has now rolled out and people can apply to be in the lottery to be in the city's Guaranteed Basic Income pilot and get $500 a month. So that is available on the city's website, and I would spread the word about that. Applications are open through the end of December, but I don't have updates on the continuation of that work or anything like that. Another piece, and actually most of you have joined the TEC since the TEC reviewed HR's like trans equity review, which was pre-COVID, but thanks to Destiny's consistent pushing on this, HR leadership is reviewing all of HR's policies and practices in terms of treatment of trans and gender nonconforming employees, and the results from that review will be incorporated into HR's diversity, equity, and inclusion review and strategic plan, which is being completed over the course of this winter. So that is also moving forward. And then scrolling again, and again, this will be attached if you want to see all the things that I have no updates listed next to. I'm just trying to move through this more concisely. But in terms of bathrooms, as some of you may remember, there is currently a city staff work group looking into whether we can require that all single stall restrooms in city-owned and licensed buildings are gender neutral. That work group met earlier today, is developing a pretty comprehensive set of recommendations and kind of what this process can look like moving forward, and is planning on presenting that to council in the first couple months of 2022. I will give you all a heads up right now that part of what that work group is going to end up presenting is that there is going to be a need for financial support in order to make this super feasible. So that will definitely be a potential advocacy place, is around getting funding behind this bathroom work. But the bathroom work is moving forward, even though we've identified some legal barriers and are going to have to look at it from a slightly different approach than previously planned. Those are the updates I have on your recommendations. I'm curious if anyone has any questions. I know I stayed pretty high level on that.
This is Billy, and I just had a question. I probably should have asked it earlier when we were talking about budget, but I know that the state has quite a surplus of money in their budget for this upcoming year. Does that affect us at all in terms of, like, do you think we could get money from the state, or like, is there programs that maybe some of these fall under that we, because it's like a hefty surplus from what I've read. It's like $7 billion or something.
This is Track. That's a great question. I do not know anything about that. If anyone else on this call has a sense of if there's ways that the city can benefit from that, would love to hear it. My guess, though, is that unfortunately the answer is no. The American Rescue Plan Act funding has to be used specifically for COVID relief related stuff, but we'll give the city a large amount of money to distribute when we deal with it in mid-2022. So anything that can fall under that umbrella in any way, there will be solid chunks of funding for. But I think that is the only additional funding that we have access to. Does anyone have any other questions?
This is Kenzie. No questions about our past recommendations, but Track, I'd like to throw out a potential recommendation if this is the right space to do so. Great. Well, I had a work-sponsored training on weight bias and discrimination, and I learned that only Michigan and like a handful of cities have weight and size as a protected class. So like currently in the state of Minnesota, you can legally be discriminated against based on your weight or size. And I would love for us to see what that would look like in the city of Minneapolis. And I believe, actually, I don't remember what you said, but you said we could possibly ask someone about this.
This is Track. I don't know who in civil rights, but my guess is anyone who was curious about that conversation, it would be connecting with, I would figure out who in civil rights to ask what that process even looks like.
Well, I would love if we did that personally.
This is Track. I'm happy to figure out who that is and connect at least Kenzie over. Is there anyone else who would want to be in an email thread or conversation around that?
I would like to. Diana.
Sure. Olivia.
Oh, and Billy, I see your hand up. Awesome. There will be an incoming email. Thank you for that suggestion, Kenzie.
This is just a related question. This is Galen. I'm sure there's an actual list of like all of the like boards and all these other sorts of folks affiliated with the city. But I wonder, we do a lot of wide-ranging work and we're advocating for a lot of very different things. And I wonder if there are other people already in the city that we could be working on or collaborating with for some of these things that aren't necessarily specific to trans folks, right? That we care about because we care about people and their well-being. But that maybe we could partner with on these sorts of initiatives, particularly if we're like going to recommend a particular thing, if we can get someone who at least politically looks more connected to this specific ask, it might be advantageous. Like, I don't want, not that council members would do this, but if I don't want council to be like, I thought this was the Trans Equity Council and they're just like telling us to do all of these things that are about like, you know, being decent people and like not discriminating against people, like all of this other sort of stuff. So it'd be great to have like someone to collaborate with to like amp up these things that we care about that might not be seen as our area.
This is Kenzie. I will say that one of our TEC recommendations was to get like a listserv of all of the boards so that we could do exactly that. And somewhere someone is supposed to be doing that, or there's not a position that has the capacity to do that, or there's always some excuse as to why we don't have that. But yes, I think that makes a lot of sense to collaborate with other boards that want similar things. And also the more voices that are asking for something, you know, the more that city council is going to be pushed. So yeah, not sure where to go from there, but I don't know. Track, do you have any ideas of how else we can try to communicate with the other boards?
Yeah, this is Track. I am going to put in the minutes and put in the chat the list of the other city boards. Like, I can connect with staffers of the boards. You're just in this awkward situation where you have to go through your staffer to their staffer to the board instead of directly over. But am happy to connect you to any that feel relevant. I think there will be some, like, tenant opportunity to purchase. I'm kind of watching what the Housing Advisory Committee is doing so that you all can align as necessary. This conversation, maybe, like, there is not something that is quite as obvious. I think I don't know well enough what the scrolling and talking, what exactly boards look like around just like civil rights work more broadly. But I also think this is a place where community orgs are also an asset. It does not have to be a city established body for it to be a group that would be heard by elected officials as being the right people to push a conversation. And so I'm super open to any connections you all have or places you all want to build connection on that front as well. And would also say, I think historically the TEC has focused a lot on city council. There are 13 people. They can be easier to reach. We've had obviously some amazing allies on council. In the new governance structure, there is going to be a lot more that has to go through the mayor's office that previously had to go through city council. I'm still trying to wrap my head around that. I have not given you all super clear guidance on that because I don't feel like I have enough information to do that well yet. But I think things like updating civil rights ordinances like this would definitely be, you need to find an ally in the mayor's office as well, and you need to like convince them as well as council, just as kind of a general heads up. But regardless, I think I would say folks who are interested and or anyone, look at this list of boards and or just like other folks, orgs you're connected to, let me know like if there are connections I can help make, or if there's others you are already connecting to that you want to pull into the conversation. But totally agreed. I think it is actually true and not just a harsh read that when the TEC advocates around things that benefit trans people but are not seen as explicitly about trans people, having other partners in that advocacy would already help you a lot. I don't think you were being unrealistic in that read.
Mrs. Galen, thank you. I didn't want to be a bummer, but I just wanted to push the idea that like we might not be the right people to ask, or at least at the front of the conversation.
Does anyone have anything else on recommendations? If not, I managed to cover the trans issues work group update in going over the recommendations. So moving past that and Hunter, passing it to you, the TEC is going to need to officially vote to adopt the 2022 meeting calendar.
All right. Hello, this is Hunter speaking, and here is the 2022 calendar for meetings. It's the second Thursday of every month, and the dates are listed here until the end of the year of 2022. The time will be 5 to 7. It's 2-hour meetings. So would anyone be interested in adopting this calendar?
This is Billy. I motion to adopt, Hunter.
Seconded.
Great.
And I'm sorry, who was the second?
Kenzie was the second.
Thank you.
And this is track. Here comes roll call again. Kenzie?
Yes.
Hunter?
Yes.
Diana?
Yep.
Melissa?
Yes.
Amira?
Yes.
Billy?
Yes.
Galen?
Sure.
Olivia?
Yes.
Taryn?
Yes.
And Destiny?
Yes.
Wonderful. 10 in favor, 3 absent, none opposed. You have a meeting calendar. I will get meetings posted on LIMS and get you all calendar invites within the next week or so. The co-chairs and I briefly discussed waiting until January to kind of think through a subcommittee plan for 2022. So you're just going to get regular calendars, regular meetings for right now. They do all have to be separate invites and not a recurring invite because of how we save our recordings. So apologies for the spam of calendar invites you're going to get from me. Just acknowledging that in advance.
This is Kenzie. Trek, may I throw out one more thing? Just while we're talking about subcommittees, I don't know, just throwing out if anyone has any ideas for new subcommittees that we could implement, or if anyone wants to advocate for the same subcommittees that we've had. Last year, I believe we had policy and training, and that's it. For past members, did that work for you? Do you like that? And for all members, is there anything else that we should consider? You don't have to answer now, but just think on it until we get to our next meeting, and then we can dive in and try to figure it out.
This is Billy. Did we also have a summit subcommittee, or am I making that up?
This is Track. I think we had one. I think we mostly had folks who were interested in summit planning just join the general city summit planning meetings, but kind of like, quote unquote, counted that as your subcommittee participation and didn't ask you to attend another subcommittee as well. Great point. Alrighty, this is Track. So I'm now going to do a very bittersweet moment, which is some welcome to some new folks and some goodbyes. I know Diana and Amira and Olivia all kind of introduced themselves at the beginning of the meeting. Super glad to have you here as new community members on the TEC. And also wanted to acknowledge that Shannon, who had briefly stepped on as our public school appointee, is super busy being a teacher during COVID and is not actually going to be able to continue in that role. So they recently stepped down, and I'm trying to be in good practice of not just holding a membership list in my head and actually sharing out that information. And wanted to give a really big thank you and goodbye to Hunter, who has now been a TEC co-chair for 2 years, 2+ years. I don't know what math is. And who is moving out of state, but is going to be super, super, super missed. And wanted to give you space if you wanted to say anything, Hunter.
Wow. Absolutely. Yeah. Whew. Honestly, I just want to cry. It's really touching. So as a Black, deaf, blind, trans person here, I recognize quite significant changes that have happened within the TEC for the past couple of years, that, for being a member as well as being co-chair, and also having wonderful interpreters who are very familiar with the TEC and the content, the legislature, Senate, all of it. Really being a member of this group has been so significant for me, and the interactions have been amazing, building rapport with Track. You as a staff person now, when we started, and we had so much fun, and then Track became a staff person. And now, we're seeing, wow. I just have to say a big thank you to Track. I know that you always had my back, always. It's been amazing, now to see our membership growing, how we started really small, and then, we have increase and decrease in size, and now it seems really strong, good size. And so I am absolutely going to miss this, and I will always remember this group, and, who's helped me through my own journey. And also with in the state of Virginia, now I'm serving as an executive director for equity of Virginia is the name of it. And so, you know, it's for giving access for queer folks. And so I will be having this conversation. And also what I'm doing is I have to say again, for me to be able to do this is in large part because of the TEC. And so I want to thank each and every one of you, especially people who are new members. Thank you so much as well. I want to say thank you to Coco being on this journey with me and with Melissa. So yeah, thank you.
And this is Jack. Hunter, you are still welcome. I'll wait till Hunter's not crying and can see what I'm saying. You are still welcome to come to TEC meetings whenever you want. Like, just because you're not an official member doesn't mean we don't want you hanging out. And you know I will happily schedule interpreters whenever you want to come, if it is not something we already have interpreters for. So just, we're not kicking you out. We're just thanking you as you step down from your official role, to be clear.
Thank you. Thank you. I know that means a lot. And you know, I do want to continue with that. So.
And to continue the sad note, the next thing
All right, enough about me. We should move on.
I was going to say, continuing the sad note, the next thing I had on the agenda was just explaining to you all how executive sponsorship works in a council, city council change. As I know I've always said to you, like, City Council Member Cunningham is the TEC's executive sponsor. And it's been clarified to me that an executive sponsor is something you need when you create a board and not something you continue to need in council turnovers. So there is not like a crisis in which you all need to find a new council member. You will continue to find council members and hopefully the mayor who will advocate for various things you're working on. But since he also took time out of an incredibly busy schedule after being up who knows how late, I didn't watch till the end of the budget hearing last night, I wanted to give a really big shout out and thank you to Councilmember Cunningham, who helped start the TEC from the very beginning and get it off the ground, and has been absolutely the TEC's biggest advocate in so many places, and especially kind of like calling other council members in to pay attention to your recommendations and all the work you've done, and calling out all of your work and just championing so much of this work in the city. So I wanted to give a big thank you, give space for anyone else to say anything they want, give space for you to say anything you want, but appreciate you stopping in for this last meeting as well, and know how appreciated you are by this body.
I'll just say very briefly that I helped to launch the Transgender Equity Council in, I believe it was 2016, through work I was doing when I worked in Mayor Betsy Hodges' office. I was able to pick up the mantle. I'm sorry, my dogs are playing in the background. Picked up the mantle from Council Vice President Jenkins, who had started a lot of the work. So continuing that moving forward. And so now it's very amazing to then watch the work. It may have been 2017, not 2016. But anyway, watching the work shift. And now exiting office, being the executive sponsor, I just have to say thank you all so much for all of your hard work. I'm so grateful that I get to be in community with you all. Thanks.
Sorry, I wanted to say one quick thing. Your dogs are amazing. and thank you for all of the support and assistance you've provided in all of this work. For me, coming into Minneapolis, I moved here a couple years ago, was such a great feeling to be able to come into a city where I already knew that there were like people advocating for my community, especially on city council.
Those
I have
are
two
some
more downstairs.
adorable dogs. Hmm.
This is Jack. On that remarkable note, Hunter, I'll turn it over to you to introduce our presenter for tonight.
Sorry about that. The interpreter was just having some technical issues here. Okay, this is Hunter, but looks like actually I'm frozen again. Let me see if I can catch the interpreter again. Okay, now we're good to go. Thank you so much. And sorry for Melissa's dogs in the background barking. So just wanted to say we are to introduce Jason Buckland, who is here from the organization Out for Good, which is a part of the Minneapolis Public Schools. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. Welcome, and you can take it away from here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Again, my name is Jason Buckland. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the LGBTQ program coordinator at Minneapolis Public Schools. That's the Out for Good program. Before I get started, just as a way of segue, just a thank you to Philippe and Shannon and Hunter for the work that you've done in the TEC. Hunter, I know that you and I haven't got to work together too much, but I've got to know Shannon and Philippe through different parts of my life. So thank you. Just wanted to put a thank you out there to everybody for all the work that you do in the city. So I think today for our time, I'm just going to start with a big, broad brushstroke overview of what the role of Out for Good and Minneapolis Public Schools is and what we do. And then I'd really like to be able to just open it up for conversation. So if there are other questions, if you'd like to learn more about specific details, be able to just ask those questions and we can dialogue back and forth. That works a little bit easier for me. I hope that works for you as well. Excuse me. I had all this time to drink water and I hadn't done it. All right, so again, a little bit about Out for Good. We started this program in Minneapolis Public Schools back in 1996. So it's been around for however many maths that is. So it's hard to do math in public. Since 1996. And when we started, we were one of 6 school districts in the nation to have a program like this. St. Paul was another one. So on one hand, it was like, oh, it's kind of cool that between the Twin Cities, we have a third of the nation's resources. And on one hand, it's kind of terrible that between the Twin Cities, we had a third of the nation's resources, right? But what we've really seen in the last 10 years is school districts across the nation really start to take on the work of gender and sexuality as that applies to the school community, students, and parents. And I think I'm actually going to do a little storytelling here. So I graduated college in I went to college in 1999. And I wanted to be like the gay English teacher that taught theater. Like that was like the hill that I wanted to climb. Like it was my favorite place. What's what I wanted to do. I had a very well-intentioned theater professor back in the year 2000 who was like, well, if you're gay, you can't be a teacher, right? Because of the propaganda around gay men as predators, right? And that still exists in educational spaces. So when I talk about this work is sometimes brand new to educational spaces, that's one of the reasons why it still is. And one of those fears that people have to be able to talk about gender and sexuality inside public school spaces and educational spaces. So I just kind of want to, for some reason, I felt the need to frame that in this space. But fortunately, some amazing people was able to start the Out for Good program and Out for Equity in St. Paul, again, back in 1995 and 1996. So what we do, I'm going to break it down into students, staff, district, and community. So those are kind of the buckets I'm gonna talk about. So for students, we have our Gender and Sexuality Alliances. So those are GSAs, formerly known as Gay Straight Alliances, updated language, Gender and Sexuality Alliances. When I started, we had 7 in the district. We now have 23 Gender and Sexuality Alliances in the district. It's shifted truthfully a little bit with COVID and distance learning and just the sheer amount of things that teachers and students and everybody's taking on, but we are still able to engage. But the number prior to COVID was 23, and we actually added 2 middle schools this year, which I think were our last 2 middle schools to add, which were Franklin and Olson. Middle school are currently working on setting up Gender and Sexuality Alliances. We do events with students, so that's QQuest, which is our LGBTQ student conference. That's been going now for 17 years. And I actually got to be a part of the very beginning of that, like 17 years ago, and then get to see it still forming. The last time it was in person, so it started 17 years ago as a one-day conference for high schoolers, and we had 127 high schoolers there. It's now a 2-day conference, and the last time it was in person, there was 500 middle schoolers on the first day and 500 high schoolers on the second day. And we had, I like to tell the story. On the last time we had it in person for middle schoolers, we had a drag performer from South High as one of our closing pieces for the students. And when the performer came out on our stage, all the students like rushed, just rushed to the front of the stage, and I had to step back for a moment and just kind of look. And there's all these faces that were just like screaming and crying, and it was a moment of joy, you know. And I just had to think, like, some of those negative things that queer and trans people may say in their heads over the course of their lives, like maybe these students are going to be able to, we'll say those a little bit less, because they got to have a day where they were centered and they were valued and they were cared for. And that's something that educators can do every day for our students. It shouldn't take a field trip to be able to do that. But that's almost, right, like in a weird way, like how simple it can be, right? I think representation is like 80% of our work, like allowing you to see yourself in spaces you normally don't see yourselves, right? And that opens up imagination, it opens up belief and all those pieces. So representation is a huge part of what I do, because I think about the things that I had to disappear inside of myself when I was going through school, right? So that's some of the work that we do with our students. We also do prom. And queer prom, and I don't have to tell you all this, is better than straight prom or just school prom. All the students one year just got in a big circle at the end and just saying Purple Rain with all their, like, just in a big like circle with everyone was on their shoulders, you know, like, and there's the people like standing against the wall, and people will go up and be like, hey, come join us, right? And I just think that's like something that the queer community brings to the table. And so prom is always great. We do Youth Pride at the end of the year as way of celebration, and also to kind of take over the park before like Twin Cities Pride. We do a little Youth Pride gathering, and that's done with some community partners through MINSOC, which is the Minnesota School Outreach Coalition. And then this year, for the first time, we did Spirit Day, which was kind of a beginning of the year kickoff. And the first in-person event we'd done in 19 months, it was outdoors. It was at Loring School near Victory Park off Victory Memorial in Minneapolis. And that was done with Queer Space Collective. So we're also trying to collaborate with different community partners as well. And then there's been a great group of students who are working on an all-gender restroom campaign for the district. We have 37 schools right now out of our 72 that have all-gender restrooms. We should be able to say that we have all of our schools with all-gender restrooms, right? And so we have students who are organizing, and again, there's a part of me that goes, you shouldn't have to organize. The person who can push the button should push the button and make the funding available to make the thing happen, right? But There's a great group of students who's organizing around that. They put out a survey that over 800 students filled out. 75%, over 75% were in favor of all gender restrooms. And then from that survey, they also got 200 other students who checked the little box to say, I'm interested in staying involved in this work. So they've also organized a group of over 200 students to become advocates for queer and trans inclusion in our schools, which is just awesome to get to see young folks lead this work. So that's kind of our student bucket. For staff, we do a big part of it is trainings. So we have our kind of inclusive gender inclusive classrooms 101 training. So that's how asking people to look at their own gender journey. It makes the case that LGBTQ inclusion is something that benefits everyone. It looks at different practices, different curriculum examples, and then goes over our policies and expectations. So that's our 101. We do that inside schools. We also do that for every new hire that comes into the district. So every person that's been hired new in the last 2 years will have gone through this training as well. We also, like the evolution of that, is a training we have called Dangerous Intersections, which is the subtitle to that is How the Gender Binary Upholds White Supremacy Culture. That looks at the history and roles of colonization and assimilation into the public school system, looks at Black feminism, theory, thought, and leaders, and also centers BIPOC trans leaders work inside there, and really looks at what identities in your school are in danger, what identities in your school are at the risk of falling through the cracks, and how do we get curriculum that's more representative of especially our Black, queer, and femme students. So that's kind of based off of Charlene Carruthers' book Unapologetic, which is really around centering Black, queer, femme, and accessibility around ability in the work that you do. So that's the training that we've been doing now for the last 2 years. We also do a lot of consultations. So schools will reach out about different issues that maybe they're having in their classroom, in the hallways, looking for community connections, how to talk with parents, those sorts of pieces. I will say this year, I've received more emails and calls about homophobic and racist comments being said between students than I've received in a year that I've worked here. I don't believe that a generation of young people woke up more racist and homophobic. I do believe that a generation of young people went through a collective trauma and haven't had their needs met, and that aggression is manifesting itself in the language of homophobia and racism. And so we need to make sure that we are, as a public school and a community and a city, holding space to be able to provide the supports that young people need, so that they're going to go back a little bit. The phrase that hurt that's not transformed is transferred, right? And right now we have a lot of people that have been hurt, and they don't have a place that's been transformed yet. So that's something that we're seeing in our schools this year that is honestly taken me by surprise a little bit, and I think a lot of us. So I'm getting a lot of those emails from staff there. And I also work as an equity coordinator for our elementary school portfolios. And so again, that's looking at racial equity and gender justice and working with schools' equity teams and engagement teams, helping them develop plans around that work and then supporting them at their meetings as well. Okay, so that's the staff bucket. Now the district bucket. The district bucket is policy. So we updated our policies back in 2014 for around gender inclusive policies. A couple years, 3 years ago, we were able to get our student database changed so that students can have their names and pronouns reflected on their documents. And of course, when rolling something like that out, there's been phases of retweaking it as we've found those moments where the system wasn't working the way that it should. We developed a gender and sexuality course last year that was piloted at Edison and Henry High School. I think it might be the first high school gender and sexuality studies course in the state of Minnesota. I'm not sure about that, but I feel like it is. And then we're currently working on, again, as I mentioned too, making sure that all gender restrooms are safe and accessible across all of our buildings in the district. And I think, oh, and then the other piece too, kind of work that's coming up that still needs attention that we're looking at. I've spent a lot of my time in the district with students at the front. My original work was as a youth worker over at District 202, which was an LGBTQ youth center back in the day. And with that, our staff need a lot of attention as well. The system is, I'm going to say, our retention, especially for trans employees, is poor. We will recruit trans employees, but we will not retain them. And oftentimes what is cited is it's not about students, it's about other adult staff members that create that environment. So that's an area of focus that we are wanting to make sure that we're putting attention on as well. So I've been working with a counselor and then also a classroom teacher, and then originally also partnering with Shannon, who is on the TEC, about starting to see what we can be doing for staff to build community with each other. Because oftentimes, if you are a queer or trans staff member in education, you're like one or two in the building, right? So like, where do you find community, right? And then the other side of that coin then is working with HR to make sure that our policies are enacted in the same way that we're doing with our students. So if we're able to change student names in our database, we should be able to change adult names in our database, right? Okay, those that's the presentation. So that's what we do at Minneapolis Public Schools. And I would love, and I've got to work with TRAC and the TEC. I think since it was not TRAC specifically the whole time, but we've been involved with the TEC, whether it was with the Trans Equity Summit or then being able to have a member of MPS on the TEC. So TRAC's been a huge help in making sure that we are getting together and meeting and making sure that we've got our eye where it needs to be. So I would love to hear from folks, things they'd like to learn more about, experiences they know about, things they'd like to, yeah, what comes up for you. As I was kind of talking about the scope of work that we're doing at Minneapolis Public Schools.
This is Hunta speaking. So yes, hi, this is Hunta. And so just thinking about some of the things you were talking about the gender neutral bathrooms. I forget the number or exactly what you'd said, but what the number was out of, I don't remember exactly the specific stats that you gave, but the point that I'm wanting to get across is I'm wondering if you're trying to do something institutionally. So thinking about, oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. The interpreter misunderstood. I'm thinking about residential schools or deaf schools specifically. If they're not residential schools, even the deaf school that's here locally, Metro Deaf School, or the residential school, which is in Faribault, which is Minnesota State Academy for the Deaf. And so I'm wondering about if there's any work that is being done with that too, because I know that's really important too. We do have deaf, blind, hard of hearing, queer community members who are not going to feel comfortable either to go to the bathroom, use the bathroom while they're at school. And so they're having to hold it for, all day long before they're able to feel safe until they can get home. And so I'm wondering, I'm hearing the number that you're referring to, but I'm wondering too, if you know anything about other schools outside, like within the deaf schools at all. Are you familiar with anything?
I'm primarily familiar with the schools that we have at Minneapolis Public Schools. However, one thing I find between Minneapolis and St. Paul is when we're able to do something and get a model for it, other places in the state can replicate that model. So I think the idea for that would really be to propose those models to the Minnesota Department of Education, and then have the Minnesota Department of Education push, right, for accessible restrooms in buildings outside of Minneapolis, and in this case, I would say St. Paul as well. Does that address? And I know it doesn't directly answer, but does that get to the question?
Yeah, I think so. I'm just trying to make sure too, that deaf students have the same opportunity to use, all gender bathrooms. And I know sometimes too, there are patterns that happen within other schools too. And so I know often that public schools will sometimes get some of those things more quickly. And so sometimes the deaf schools get missed as a result. And so that's why I was just thinking about what we can do too, to make sure that the other schools within Minnesota, specifically deaf schools, that those are becoming, I like what you were saying too, as far as that becoming a model. And so anyway, that's all I wanted to talk about or wanted to add.
Yeah, I would. This is Jason again. I would be curious to see if the Safe and Supportive Schools office at the Department of Education would take that on as a component of their work when they're working with other buildings. When the Minnesota Department of Education is able to set some guidelines, it really helps other schools adopt those guidelines as well.
Great. Okay, thank you.
This is Galen. A quick question. Well, maybe not quick. So I have the good fortune of having a child that recently entered Minneapolis public schools. And so I know you talked a little bit about stuff going on with staff and all this other sort of picture of the work that's being done. I'm curious to what extent the average Minneapolis public schools employee has received any sort of training on queer and trans kids. And the reason I ask, to get the personal point, my 5-year-old is in kindergarten. They are non-binary. And we found out the other week that their teacher was telling other kids, oh no, Kellen doesn't know what their gender is. They haven't decided what their gender is yet. And I was just like, oh my God, why do, and and so it's kind of getting at that broader point of what is the district doing to ensure teachers know what they're talking about and dealing with, and what have you seen so far?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So that example there is exactly what a lot of my emails and phone calls look like, which is parents or other educators or people saying, hey, I overheard this in this classroom, or my child's about to enter Minneapolis public schools. So outside of the new hire orientation where we do these trainings, I then, upon hearing issues like this, often will use that as an opportunity to get in front of the whole staff to be able to do a staff-wide professional development. And truthfully, I think our K-5 resources we almost have more K-5 resources than we do some other places, because there's so many good children's books now, right? And so in this case, when we would talk with the educator, we would also probably introduce them to different books. So books like Red, a Crayon Story, if folks are familiar with that one. It's about a little red crayon that colors blue, and then it draws fire and it draws water. But it teaches the critical thinking skill of there's more than one way to be a red crayon. There's more than one way to be a boy. There's more than one way to be a girl. Or whatever identity we have that society is going to tell us about, there's more than one way to be that. Then when somebody says, hey, why is Henry wearing a dress today? Well, actually, there's more than one way for Henry to be Henry, so we're just going to let Henry be Henry. Anyway, 2 + 2 is 4, right? So you're helping build those mental frameworks to be able to have different conversations. Sometimes you can do the bigger, hey, let's really unpack and look at gender. Sometimes you need to have teachers equipped to have those like redirection strategies. Another book we really like is Neither. So in a world of chickens and rabbits, there's only chickens, there's only rabbits. One day, someone's born that's neither a chicken or a rabbit. Hey, Henry said this about their gender. Oh, remember that book we read? Well, you know, and so that's how we really want to work with educators around different lessons to bring into the classrooms. But we also talk about different classroom practices then. So not simple things, right, that are free and you can do tomorrow. So not divided into boy and girl lines. There's no such thing as a boy toy or a girl toy, right? And just helping develop non-binary critical thinking skills, right? Which is getting out of this or that, either or thinking, are things that we really try to promote. And so it's hard to pinpoint percentage of educators, one, because our turnover is real high, right? And so that's why we really like to be able to have this available to all new hires, in addition to as things come up. And I will say, in the time I've been here, I've at this point been in most schools. There are a few schools that like to fly under the radar, but you know, they come around. And if, as a parent, you would like to reach out and say, hey, this is the school. Would you care to follow up about just like, here's the better way to talk about gender? More than happy to be able to follow up with the admin or the teacher around that.
This is Galen again. That's super helpful. Thank you for all of that context on kind of the approach that you've had. I used to be a middle school special education teacher, and I left the classroom because I was transitioning. Mm-hmm. So I have this like perspective where I don't want to come into someone's classroom and be like the trans Karen. I guess that's a Samantha. I think that's a Samantha, and like just like yell at them because I want, even though that's what I feel like doing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that sort of approach was really helpful to hear, and thank you for that.
Jason, this is Billy. I do have a question about if there's legislation in place that protects trans youth specifically, because I know that there was, and that might be tricky, I don't know. I'd have to read up more on that, but I know that there was a situation, I believe in Hastings, where a child was outed. And maybe this is something that the TEC can put on our recommendations if there's something that we can do to protect trans youth specifically or youth specifically. But if there's anything like that exists.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Billy. And this is Jason. Yes. I want to back up to broader context to what I'm seeing right now. You referenced a situation in Hastings where a parent outed another parent's child, right? And this group on Facebook was, I believe, originally called Conservative Parents of Hastings or whatever, and now it moved its title to Concerned Parents of Hastings. But what we have is adults, right, outing and putting in young people in harm's way. And I just want to really like name that as something that's happening right now, right? I think it's important to look at what's happening in education right now as far as legislative attacks go. And you have critical race theory being under attack, and you also have gender identity, right, being under attack. And those two, and that's by design, you know, and controlling whose story gets told, how we get to define things. And so I'm kind of going off the path, but I'll come back. It's been a long time since people have challenged books in our schools' libraries. And we're now starting to see more people challenge books or want to challenge books in our libraries. So there's something growing there, and I just want to name that for what that is. Legislatively, foundationally, when the Safe and Supportive Schools Act was passed, which I'm going to say was probably 2012-ish, right around on one side of the marriage law. It was either before or after. That enumerated and named gender identity and sexual orientation as protected classes inside of all of our schools. And so the foundation to start with is that gender identity is a protected class that's free from discrimination, harassment, or harm by policy, right? And differential treatment. If I'm not allowed to learn about this part of me, or if I have to, I don't know, if I'm not able to use my name, if I'm not able to use a restroom, all these things can be seen as differential treatment, right? So that's our like baseline legislative protection. It doesn't mean that we can't go above and beyond that and specifically have a trans inclusion policy, right? I think dependent upon the location and the politics of the time, Minneapolis and St. Paul went about their gender inclusion policies differently, and I think it's great that we did, because we get to see different models, and we were both kind of figuring out what best practice around gender inclusive policies looked like, because again, this was 2014, and I think we were ahead of most places at that point doing that. So when Minneapolis did it, we just updated all of our policies that included gender to make sure that it included whichever gender is asserted, and so that just opened that up, and we embedded it in all of our gender related policies. St. Paul created a specific gender inclusion policy, trans inclusion policy. What I like about what they did is they really got a lot of parent, community, and teacher buy-in in that process. So that was awesome, and that was really great. Politically, it's harder to knock down our policy than it is their policy, because ours is woven into like 6 other policies, right? So you'd really have to sit there and untangle it. Where when you've got a singular policy, everyone can point and say that policy is the problem. Does that make sense? So like, dependent upon the climate politically and in the community, both models can reach the end or the goal, but the route you go about it, that is worth different conversation.
Thank you. That was very helpful. I was not aware of that. So basically what I'm gathering is our policy in Minneapolis is just harder to fall than St. Paul's policy as a standalone policy in St. Paul.
Yep, because they would have to attack our naming policy, our gender policy, our like grouping policy, our, and they would have to make formal, they would have to make formal challenges to each of those policies. And at the end of the day, our equity policy and our equity policy in the district enumerates gender identity, expression, and sexual orientation, and the state's Safe and Supportive Schools Act enumerates gender identity and expression and sexual orientation. So I think it would be a hard challenge to do that. Doesn't mean those challenges won't come, and doesn't mean it's really great to have a general counsel that is supportive, because they make a lot of the work a lot easier. So those are the district lawyers, and they are on board, and they've been on board the entire time I've been in this role. So that's made all this a lot easier because lawyers.
And this is Track. I'll also just add that gender identity is a protected class in the city of Minneapolis as well. Great. And very few civil rights complaints get filed around gender identity, but it is something people can file civil rights complaints around. I don't know how common of knowledge that is, so that's also a different level of resource that exists, if that's relevant.
Okay.
I'm open to other questions, but my question before our time is done is, and this is a question, the perennial question that Track and I ask each other, is in what ways can the TEC and MPS work together in more collaboration? Or how do we what's our power?
I think that's a great question. I know I used to be on a LGBTQ board in Denver, and our question for Denver public schools was always essentially like, how can we get our little fingers in there? Like, how can we like get all up in that and like do things? And so I think the biggest question that I have from our perspective is like, who, other than yourself with Minneapolis Public Schools, would we be wanting to work with? What authority is there to make anything happen?
Yeah.
And what does that look like? Does that look like the TEC advocating for something, but maybe not technically as the TEC? I don't know what our requirements are on our end, but like sending a letter or like of support for certain actions.
Yeah.
I think that's my biggest question, because I think schools are such an obvious place where there can be a lot of good done for queer and trans folks, right? And I don't know where we can go.
Yeah. I think thank you for that, and I think one thing that makes me think of is, so like if we know in January our students are going to go speak to the school board about all gender restrooms, a conveniently timed follow-up letter to school board members from the city of Minneapolis TEC, or just as public citizens of Minneapolis, right? Would be one of those ways that I think could be really beneficial. And then I'd almost wonder about the kind of the school board relationship as a way, just because thinking about like how this committee is positioned in city of Minneapolis and how they're positioned inside of the kind of district things. With the restrooms, the issue has been, okay, so as we're remodeling schools, all the remodels include all gender restrooms, which is great. What if your school doesn't get remodeled for 5 years? What if your school was already remodeled before this started happening, right? It takes about it could take up to $20,000 to create an all gender restroom inside of a building. Sometimes it's $500 because it's a lock change and a sign change, right? So there's a financial aspect that has not been yet made priority, I would say, by our district leadership, to say, hey, when we're doing our capital funding, this is a part of it, right? And there's always going to be some other thing. Our buildings need air conditioners. Absolutely. Safe entryways has become a thing in the last couple of years. But once you're all cooled off and you entered the school safely, you have to use the restroom. Wouldn't it be great if we also had all gender? But like in some people's minds that gets pushed down. And I try to remind folks that this absolutely does impact queer and trans students, and it impacts students with different medical needs. It impacts different religious and cultural needs around privacy. Maybe you just need some privacy. Maybe you're safer in a non-sex segregated public space, because gay, straight, trans, or cis, like if you don't fit a certain box, and I'll speak from just a male perspective on this, like if you identify as male and you don't fit the mold of male and you're in an all male space, those spaces aren't safe either, right? And so making sure that folks understand that this is actually stuff that impacts everybody. that's just really a strategy around interest convergence.
This is track one very logistical follow-up. Was that a hypothetical the students are speaking to the school board in January, or was that the students are speaking to the school board in January?
Thank you, track. The students are speaking to the school board in January, in reality.
When in January?
But I did say it like a hypothetical.
When's the meeting?
Let me look it up. I want to say it's probably, it looks like might be January 4th, but let me just double check the board calendar. That's my dog. And thank you for your patience there. It is January 11th.
So this can definitely be on the January meeting agenda to see if there is action you all want to take on that, since you'll be meeting not that long after the 11th.
Awesome. Awesome.
I have one last question for either Track or Jason. Do we have anybody else that is interested in being on the TEC as our like Minneapolis Public Schools like liaison? Very sad to see Shannon go, but I think it's like so helpful to have that perspective, and someone that we can have like regular contact with. So I was just wondering.
Yeah, I think we'll put that out again, and there's a few folks that I have in mind that I've been in contact with this year. We are in a year where we have over 300 staff vacancies, and so people's cups are very full. So if we don't have someone in a while, I actually Ian works with me on a contract basis. They've only funded one position in the district, and so I've just used part of my budget to like contract someone who could work about 20 hours a month with us, and they could be an interim representative, and they're trans identified. And work with me in the district. So maybe in an interim work, and Ian was part of the TEC 3 years ago.
Like 2, because I was here.
Okay, 2 years ago. It's time. And so maybe he could serve as an interim until we get a staff member who can be here in a more full way. And my hope is that as the year changes or things like this, Shannon could be hopefully the door is open to come back. All right. Thank you, Billy.
Does anyone have any other questions? I know we're a little over time, so I also want to respect folks' time. If not, Hunter had to leave a little early, so Kenzie, it is on you to wrap us up.
Oh, sorry. Now I'm one of those people. I'm like, well, now that the opportunity is going, I will just encourage you. So Track and I try to do a check-in once a month. If something does come up, feel free to connect with you can reach out to me individually, absolutely. Or if you want to send something to Track, that can start to be included in our monthly check-in.
Love it. Okay, well, thank you so much, Jason, for being here today and sharing your knowledge. And yeah, just very happy that you could be with us today. And I don't know, Track, is that it?
That
Motion
is it.
to adjourn?
Boom.
Second.
Can someone's amazing. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your night.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Welcome, new members. See you next month.
Yay, thank you.
See you all later.
Take care.